Well, I am super excited about today.
Me too.
Because we're covering the passage that is my favorite passage in the entire Bible.
Oh, that's exciting.
It is exciting for me.
Okay, so we're going to talk about shining bright for Christ?
Yeah, well, we're going to get there.
Okay.
Yeah. It's Philippians 2, 1 through 11 is my favorite passage.
Yes. Oh, 1 through 11. Okay.
Yes.
I mentioned 12 through 18. Okay. Anyways, there's a lot to talk about today. He's Chris and I'm Jeff and we're the Bible guys.
I didn't know where you were going with that, shining brightly for Christ. I'm like, have you read Philippians 2, 1 through 11?
Well, I didn't know that you were saying 2, 1 through 11. I just mentioned
gotcha.
12 through 18.
That's funny.
Okay. So, Chris, we have so many people that say so many kind things.
Yes.
And they leave a lot of messages. If you're following along, man, would you do us a favor? If you watch on YouTube, would you subscribe on YouTube? It helps us out significantly with regard to placement for the videos, and so that'd be great. If you follow along on Facebook, would you like us on Facebook? Would you recommend or share if you're following on podcasts? Platforms to your friends and those kind of things. But people leave a lot of messages, and so we thought we'd share a few. As a matter of fact, I hadn't read these. Desiree collected these, and they're so nice. As a matter of fact, Karen H says, I just love how you guys explain the Bible. I understand what I read from watching you guys. You guys are awesome. Bless you both.
Aw,
Isn't that nice?
Very, very nice. It's very encouraging.
Super nice, super encouraging.
So I'll read what Mario M says. I just want to say I've been thinking about proclaiming the gospel at work recently, and the fact that Jeff specifically mentioned tool and die guys, and I work in tool and die, I feel like God is trying to tell me something.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
It is funny how when God speaks, he has the ability to take one Bible verse, in normal study, and sometimes he'll be able to do 100 things through that one verse, right?
Yeah.
Maybe 1,000 things, who knows?
Yeah.
And sometimes when you hear one message, you think that was for me, but yet there's like 5,000 other people.
Yeah.
So I always used to walk up to the pastor at the end of a really good message, and I say, man, it was really nice for all these other people to show up for my message.
Yeah, for the message that you preached at me.
Right. That's what Mario's saying, right?
Yeah. Marshall L. says, I don't comment much, but I like what you said about not knowing the ending. It gives me hope, not just for me, but for people around me. Thank you. That's
really
kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah, very nice.
Hey, Mario, let me go back to Mario's thing just a little bit. Depending on what your shop is like, a lot of times guys are allowed to put up bumper stickers on their toolboxes or, wear T-shirts or whatever. And so I had a friend that really got, excited about sharing his faith, but didn't know how to bring it up. His shop was a little rough, all those kinds of things. So he wound up having, a jacket. You know how sometimes you'll have your name sewn on your jacket or something like that? So he had Jesus Saves sewn on where his name would be, just Jesus Saves. And it was kind of chilly in the winter, and so he'd wear that jacket a lot of times. And so this guy comes up to him and goes, hey, man, I've been wanting to ask you this for a while. He said, I know it must be important to you, but who is Jesus Saves? And he wasn't joking. It was serious. The guy just was reading this because that's where you put your name, right? And so he had Jesus Saves there, but the guy thought it was Jesus Saves. And it opened up an opportunity for my friend to go, oh, no, that means Jesus Saves. Of course, the guy was a little embarrassed. They laughed about it. He winds up buying him some lunch and began sharing the gospel. And over the next couple of months, winds up leading his friend to Jesus. So from that point, then a couple of other Christian friends heard that story, and they put up bumper stickers, or they put up something somewhere in their work area that then would cause people to ask a question.
Yeah.
So he wasn't just going around preaching all the time. He was just putting out a gentle Jesus Saves kind of thing. Yeah. And when people would ask a question, he'd often offer to pray for them when he knew something was difficult was going on. And next thing you know, he led several people to Jesus without being like the preacher in the tool and die shop. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that's so consistent with what Peter says. Peter said to always be ready with an answer for the hope that you have. So he just put things out there that caused people to ask questions. And then he looked for an opportunity to share the gospel. Yeah. So, Mario, that might be a good way to do it.
That's one of my favorite verses, too. 1 Peter 3:15.
Yeah.
I was thinking in my mind, I was like, hola, yo tengo sabes, Jesus sabes.
That's right. So this is really, really funny, though, isn't it? That's just one of the best things.
Super great.
And the guy wasn't being disrespectful. He just, that's where you put your name on your jacket.
Sure,
so,
yeah. I remember one time when I was just joining a church and I was misbehaving because I wasn't even a Christian yet. And I was playing volleyball with our youth group with Liz. My wife was there at the time. And we were actually just playing volleyball, and I was getting angry And anyway, so what ends up happening is I was like a terror to be, anyway, a force to be reckoned with. I go back to my car at the end of the night, and somebody had taken a note and put it under my windshield. Okay, and I had only been going to this church for like a month.
Oh yeah.
And it said Luke 6:46. I think, why do you call me Lord and don't do the things which I say?
Uh-huh.
And I know that now, but I think that's the reference. But anyway, it said Luke 6:46. And I looked at the paper, and I looked over at my buddy, and I said, okay, who is Luke, and where's the rest of his phone number? I had no idea. I had no idea that was even a reference.
Yeah, right.
I had no idea. I just thought it was like...
Yeah, I think sometimes we make a mistake thinking that people know what we're talking about and are rejecting it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they're rejecting the idea of Christians, but not Jesus, right? So
had no
that's
idea.
fantastic, man. So we're going to pick up in apparently Chris's favorite passage.
Yes.
Philippians chapter 2.
Yes.
We're going to read through verse 18, but he only wants to talk about 1 through 11. So let's start. Is there any encouragement from belonging to Christ? Any comfort from his love? Any fellowship together in the Spirit? Are your hearts tender and compassionate? Then make me truly happy by agreeing wholeheartedly with each other, loving one another, and working together with one mind and one purpose. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. You must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges, and he took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being when he appeared in human form. He humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on the cross. Therefore, God elevated him to the place of highest honor and gave him the name above all other names, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue declare that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Dear friends, you always followed my instructions when I was with you, and now that I'm away, it's even more important. Work hard to show the results of your salvation, obeying God with deep reverence and fear. For God is working in you, giving you the desire and the power to do what pleases him. Do everything without complaining and arguing, so that no one can criticize you. Live clean, innocent lives as children of God, shining like bright lights in a world full of crooked and perverse people. Hold firmly to the word of life. Then, on the day of Christ's return, I'll be proud that I did not run the race in vain and that my work was not useless. But I will rejoice even if I lose my life, pouring it out like a liquid offering to God, just like your faithful service is an offering to God. And I want all of you to share that joy. Yes, you should rejoice, and I'll share your joy.
Here it is. So, I mean, I could, probably go on for about an hour about the 11 verses, but I'm not. Well, I can't. I can't do it. But here's what I love.
Do it.
I love what is found in Philippians 2 in just the very first few verses. Is I used to preach that, and I used to say that Paul is begging for three things within the context of the church. He wants harmony, he wants humility, and then helpfulness. And so the three H's, right?
That's good.
So what he's saying is he's saying, I love the questions at the beginning, because as a pastor and a spiritual mentor and a person who feels responsibility for their growth, he's asking them a question, and it's the same question that's so applicable to all of us. He's like, so have you gained benefit from the church? Have you experienced any fellowship of his love?
Yeah.
Have you had anything together in fellowship in the Spirit? Have you received comfort? Are your hearts tender and compassionate? He's like, if you've received any good thing from the church, then make me happy. And by the way, he is a sense where he's begging you, because he says, that I beg you to make my joy complete. Another version says, right? So he's saying, like, I beg of you, if you've received anything good from this fellowship, then make me happy by, and then he goes on and he says, by wholeheartedly loving each other, working together with one mind, one purpose. And he talks about harmony. Yeah. And just the idea that, like, everybody should work together to be on the same page, to be on mission. Yeah. It's funny because, there are some people who have different philosophies on what, like, for instance, a church should do. Some churches say, hey, you should work through the Bible and dig as deep as you should go on a Sunday morning. And there's nothing wrong with that. And then there's other churches that say, no, I think Sunday morning is probably the best mechanism to reach those that are far from God, which is where our church sort of leans, right? But and then there's other churches that say, we're going to give 50% of our budget to plant churches around the world, right? And churches adopt different philosophies, all working for the same goal, reaching people for Jesus Christ. But here's the point. The point I'm making is this. Whether you belong to a church where their main thing is to send 50% of their income around the world, or maybe you belong to a church that social justice is their thing,
Sure.
and they go downtown Detroit, and man, they just adopt, social justice ministries, and they work with homeless, and they do other things like that, and they're hands-on. Or maybe you work as a church, kind of like when our weekend services happen, you realize that the primary purpose of that weekend service is for you to invite your neighbor who's far from God and bring them. Either way, to be in harmony is to say, I am on mission. I am like-minded.
Yeah.
I am saying I'm right there with you. And despite of all of our differences, we are in it together, and we're having one purpose of one mind, Paul says.
Yeah. I love that he says working together. So he's talking about, have you experienced the benefits?
Yeah.
Now work together. Paul never had a sense that the purpose of the church was to help just bring you peace and help just bring, those are side benefits, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of what he's talking about. And then he says, so then wholeheartedly agree with each other, love one another, and work together. In Paul's mind, the church is a working mechanism. It's a group of people working for God's kingdom. And I would say, if you are a part of a church, not just talking about Heritage Church that we pastor at, but if you're just a part of a church at all, but you're not working, you're not helping pick up the load, then you're not really living up to what God has designed Christians to really be, right? We should be workers too, not for salvation, but because of it, because God's mission is so important and we get to be a part of it. And so I think there's a temptation to go to a church service and just have the whole thing be about serve us, right? And instead, God is saying, no, I want you to
feed me, care for me, teach me.
That's right.
Provide for me, help me.
Sit, soak, and sour is kind of the thing, right?
That's one way to say it.
And so what he's pushing back here is, don't be a consumer Christian. Don't just go to your church and consume what your pastor has and what your singers have and what your children's ministry workers have and to offer you. Don't just go consume. You should be working too. You should be serving too. It's a part of you being like Jesus, because in just a minute he's going to say you should have the same attitude Jesus had.
Right.
And that's a humble form of he humbled himself into a form of a servant. So what do servants do? Do servants just sit around the house? They sit around the house and consume what the master of the house is offering? No, they're working. Right. That's what they're doing. And he's saying the same thing. We should have the same attitude as Jesus, and we should be serving like Jesus serves. It takes a certain amount of humility to not make our faith about us. And I would say this to finish this thought up. A lot of Christians will come and say, Jeff, I just feel like dry spiritually. I don't feel like I'm going anywhere spiritually. I don't feel like I'm growing. And I always will ask, what are you doing for others? If you're not serving, you've made it all about you. And there's a point where a sponge can only take in so much, and then it's completely full, and there's no more for it. But if you leave that full sponge, eventually that sponge is going to start stinking, right? It's going to get sour because it's not the best use of a sponge is just squeeze it out so it can take in more. And the way we squeeze out what's in us is by giving to others, serving others, building others up, and that's what Jesus did for us. And I think that this is one of those things. This passage, he's really pushing us to be like Jesus, to be humble, to do all these things, but to serve.
Yeah. And so when he says working together, one mind, one purpose, that's harmony.
Yeah.
And then he says, be humble, thinking of others better than yourself. Don't be selfish. And he's really talking about humility, right?
Yes.
And then
which I'm super good at.
Yeah, I'm the best. Yeah. I'm the best. I'm the best in the world at it.
I'm the most humble person I know.
I got to get the hand motions. Yeah. I'm the best. I'm the best. So then, and then he goes on and talks about helpfulness, because he says, don't look out for your own interests, but take an interest in others as well.
Yeah.
So, just to be helpful, like what does that person need? What can you do to help them? And then when he launches in and says, you must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had, you're absolutely right. He's actually talking about working and serving and doing this for each other. And he's also demonstrating what he's just asked us to do.
Yeah.
He's asked us to do these three things. And then he says, take, for example, Jesus. And this is why I love this passage so much, because Paul is about to take away any excuse that any of us have.
Right. He sure does.
He's like, okay, so Jesus was from the highest of highs and he went to the lowest of lows.
Right.
You can't get any higher, and believe it or not, you can't get any lower than he went. Right. So he left heaven and went one peg down to become a human because he found himself, fashioned himself as a man. But not
just did he leave heaven, he stepped off of his throne.
Right.
In heaven.
Right.
Right.
Gave up all authority.
Yes.
Because he says he considered his equality with God, even though he was equal with God,
right,
something not to be used for his own advantage.
Right.
Which means
instead he gave up his divine privileges.
Yeah. Which means like he never said, I'm sorry, do you know who you're talking to?
Yeah, not one time.
He never said that.
Yep.
Right? He never leveraged it like a card.
How dare she look at me that way?
Yeah, he never played the God card. He never used it to his own advantage. So he leaves the highest high, becomes a man, and then it says, it goes out of its way to say, not just any man, but a servant of man, right? And not just any servant of man, but he became obedient to death.
Yeah.
Right? So he's a servant who died for you. And then he says, not just any death, but death on the cross, which is the most excruciating death.
Right.
And so he goes from the highest of high to the lowest of low. And I think the reason why he does that is because any person who resists Paul's challenge is going to think of himself as important, as somebody who's not going to look out for the interest of others. Yeah. They're going to act selfishly, and they're going to be so strong-headed. Not to be in harmony is to say my way or the highway. Right. So what Paul is doing is he's using the ultimate example to empty ourselves of ourselves. Right. And he's saying, no, Jesus emptied himself. And so have the same attitude that Jesus had.
Yeah. And then because of that humility, the willingness to go from the highest to the lowest, then, therefore, God elevated him to the place of highest honor and gave him the name above all other names.
Which is a big fat exclamation point on this great passage.
That's right.
Right? Because something in you wants the hero to win at the end.
Yeah.
Something in you wants, like everybody to just celebrate those who deserve recognition.
That's right.
And Jesus deserves the highest honor. And it says he gave him the name above every other name. And I love how it says, and one day, every knee's going to bow.
Yeah.
Every tongue.
Yep.
And by the way, it may not happen on this earth. What do you mean? I'll never bow a knee. Bro, you just don't know it yet.
Yeah. You're going to bow a knee.
You're going to bow a knee whether you know it or not. It'll be in this life or the next. But one day, every single knee will be bowed because we'll eventually realize, whether it's on time or too late, just who Jesus really is.
And this is really consistent with so much of Jesus' teaching. Jesus taught us the last will be first.
Right.
Right? That's why he said he made himself the least and God made him the highest, above everything else. Jesus said, don't go sit at the head of the table. Go sit at the end of the table and let them call you up. Jesus said, if you're faithful with a little bit, God will trust you with a lot. Over and over and over again, Jesus talked about the idea, the power of humility. We tend to think of humility as being weak. And that's not it at all. Instead, it's choosing to limit ourselves and put others first. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't take care of yourself. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't provide for your family. That just should mean that you shouldn't be the most important thing in your universe.
Right. And he says the opposite way as well. He said, pride comes before a fall.
That's right.
He said, those who exalt themselves will be humbled by others. Right. So he speaks against it. And remember, what is the original sin above? What was the number one original sin?
I will exalt myself above the Most High God. That's what Satan did. Yeah,
that's what Satan did.
Lucifer.
So the original sin before Adam and Eve were even created, there was pride.
Yep.
Right.
So then, one of the neat things to kind of wrap things up here as we move into the little piece that I had mentioned, 12 to 18.
Oh yeah, those extra verses.
Yeah. One of the things that they'll do, the Middle Eastern mindset, isn't always linear, A, B, C, D. A lot of times they'll start with an idea, they'll circle the idea, and they'll come back and put a button on it, or a bow at the end of it. And he literally says, so work hard to show the results of your salvation. Remember? So our faith should be a working faith. It's not a consuming faith, it's a producing faith, right? And so then he starts to describe what that would look like, right? That we work hard to show the results of our obeying God with deep reverence and fear. God's working in us, giving us the desire and the power to do what pleases him. So God will give you the power to please him. God will give you the desire to please him if you're really one of his, if you're willing to lean in and do the work of living out your faith. And then he gives us a bunch of things. Do everything without complaining, right? Nobody could criticize you. Live clean, innocent lives.
Which, by the way, is the one thing that almost every Christian seems to overlook.
Right.
Because he attaches it so that, right?
Yes.
He says, do everything without complaining and arguing so that no one can criticize you.
Right.
Right. But Christians think that it's actually maybe the opposite must be true. I'll just complain and murmur and argue and complain so that the world looks at my faith and looks at all of faith and says, that's not attractive at all.
That's right. So then he goes on. So he tells us to work out or to work to show the results of our salvation. And then he gives us from 14 to 18 what it should be like, right? Everything without complaining and arguing, live clean, innocent lives as children of God, shining like bright lights in a world full of crooked and perverse people, holding firmly to the word of life. That's God's words, right? We're not flexing on God's word. We hold firmly to God's word. And then he said, then on the day of Christ's return, I'll be proud, right? I'll be glad that I invested so much in you because you guys are really living like Jesus.
Which
That's
circles back to his original thing that says, make my joy complete.
That's right. So the beginning and the end of this chapter or this passage right here, he says basically the same things with putting Jesus as the center of the whole reason why we do it. It's really cool.
Yeah. So I, by the way, the reason why that verse, that passage is my favorite passage is because I read a book by Bill Hybels in 1994 called Descending into Greatness. And it was something about moving tables and chairs. Because when you get into ministry, when you go to Bible college, they probably should have a class in Bible college called Tables and Chairs 101.
Yeah, that's
right. Because what ends up happening is as a church worker, all these tables and chairs.
Assistant pastor is half your job is moving tables and chairs.
Tables and chairs. And you're setting up for gatherings, right? I mean, that's all it is. And so I'm moving these tables and I'm just complaining and I'm just like thinking I'm above it. And it was actually my first pastor I worked for. His name was Chuck. And he looked at me and he goes, I think you need to read this book. And I was like, what? And I read it and it just changed my life. And it was like, wow, this is amazing. Now, keep in mind, I became a Christian and decided to go to ministry when I was like 17.
Oh, right.
Right. So it's like, I really, didn't take my faith serious until right when I decided to go into ministry. I become a Christian about a year and a half before that, but I really didn't take my faith seriously until like literally 8 months before I went to Bible college.
Wow.
And then, then I went straight into ministry after that. And so there was things I was sort of learning along the way. And I didn't really learn about this idea of humility until I read Bill Hybels' book, Descending into Greatness.
That's good.
After I was a full-time pastor. And I was like, wow, this is amazing.
But now you are a bastion of humility. You are the example to all of us.
I am so great at it. It is unbelievable.
You should do a course on it sometime. That'll be maybe for another thing. You could just give an entire lecture on how to be humble.
A TED Talk on humility.
Well, we better wrap it up.
Yeah, I think so. Hey, that's it for us. So we'll see you next time on The Bible Guys. Erwin McManus's TED Talk.